There, is that better? Sorry, we are experiencing technical difficulties. Alright, I've got some thread. Did not find the thread that I wanted to find. I'm not entirely sure where it ran off to, but we've got some gray thread that we're going to use. I'm using a size 6 needle because it's nice and thin and it goes through the silk well, but will still open up a big enough hole that I won't have issues with my thread kinking too much. Right. So this piece right here, I've stitched it down. So now I'm going to turn this little strip back on itself and then hem down the side. So the side that I'm hemming is a fold. So let's bring you over here. Let me change the angle so that you can see what I'm doing. And it's really very simple, just small felling stitches all along the edge. Once I get warmed up, I'll actually stitch a little faster, so hopefully this won't take as long as it seems like it might. I have 4 leg panels to do, so I'll try to go quickly. I will break this up in the middle with assembling the waistband or something so that there's a little bit more entertainment. So all of these little fuzzy bits of the silk that keep sticking out, instead of cutting them off, I'm just stuffing them down inside. You know, I don't want to take the time to clip, so I'll just tuck them out of the way and stitch down. Let me see if I can take this to a place where you can actually see what I'm doing. There, is that a little bit better? Sunny just asked, when I stitched the little piece of trim on, did I have a guideline that I followed? And the answer to that is yes, I did. I drew a guideline all along the out seam that was about 2 finger widths in from the cut edge. I think I might be finally getting warmed up. I think one of the important things to be comfortable with is all the hand sewing. A lot of people will really fight to avoid it at all costs, and I feel like it's just such a natural and normal part of making clothes that just accepting it and moving on is important. I mean, I'm saying that, of course, while I'm making a garment more or less by machine, but with hand finishing. But I think there are a lot of people out there who would avoid using this type of trim because it involves so much hand sewing, and just want to offer it up to them that at least if you practice a little bit, it doesn't take that long. I am running out of thread, so I'm going to take this to the back. I'm going to take a couple of small tight stitches in the same place, and then cut and reload. I'm going to change needles. The one that I was just using got a little bit bent. Okay, one stripe down. Going to clip this and set that aside so that I can press it in a little bit. I'm going to knot up my thread and I'm going to start the next panel. Okay, time to reload the thread again. Same thing, going to the back of the work. 1, 2, 3, cut. I'm not liking this thread very much. I am going to step out of frame for just a moment and grab a better thread. This is not working for me. much better. Okay. Oh, so much nicer to sew with silk. That one's done. On to the next. 3 down, 1 to go. Okay, finally, all 4 panels are done. So now I'm going to take over to the ironing table. I'm going to give them a little press. Then I'm going to find a razor blade so that I can slice them. And then we'll go from there. Not entirely sure where I stashed my pack of razor blades, so I'm going to have to do it the old-fashioned way. This thing that I'm sharpening right now is my pinking tool. In order for it to work well, I have to sharpen it extremely, extremely well. So, cross my fingers. I think that probably was enough. I don't want to overdo it because I don't want to destroy it. But now that I've got this sewn on, my iron is heated up. I'm just going to give that a little bit of a press, and it looks great. Oh yeah, the pinker's beautifully sharp. I did a good job with that. I'm just using the corner of it. I'm just drawing it across the silk in a quick, firm stroke so that it slices through. And I'm going to take my fingernail and kind of run it over them so that I can rough them up a little bit so that they actually show and they can look pretty. Here we are. And once you get into a rhythm with the cutting, you can get them very even and uniform. So one panel down, here's the next. I'm going to lay it down, I'm going to smooth it out. Give it a nice little smush with the iron. Let it cool for just a second. And then start slicing. Okay, 2 down, 2 to go. I'm going to sharpen this just a little bit more because I'm having to push just a little bit too hard and I accidentally cut all the way through the edge of one of my bits. Okay, should be a little bit better. Let's try this again. Okay, here we go. All right, another one to go, and then that part is done. Okay. And we're good. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put pocket bags on each outseam. So I'm going to start with this one right here. I've got notches marked for where they're supposed to go. Everything gets lined all the way to the top. Alright, I'm going to throw in a couple of pins. Okay, now each of these pocket bags gets sewn on all the way to the bottom, leaving it slightly short at the bottom, like about half an inch shy of the bottom. And then that first seam allowance is a little narrow, like a quarter of an inch. And then the second seam allowance, which I do a little bit up here at the top and then the rest of the way down to the hem, that's a little bit bigger. And that way the pocket will appear to be set back slightly from the edge and it won't expose. I'll move the computer in just a moment. Okay. Excuse me. Okay, so now that those are stitched, I'm going to run over here and press them quickly. I'm not going to move the computer this time. I'll be right back. Okay, so the goal now is to sew the side seam in a way that closes the pocket and leaves an opening for the hand to go through. So I line everything up at the top, and then I'm going to do a line of stitching that is just to the inside of the line of stitching that holds the pocket bag on. And this is what my notches are really for. I'm going to stitch from the top to this notch, nice and strong, and then I'm going to stop. And then I'm going to skip down to the bottom, and I'm going to find the second notch, the lower notch, and I'm going to stitch from there all the way to the end of my stitching. Then I can continue all the way down. I will pull the pocket bag bottoms out of the way, and I'm going to continue all the way down to the leg opening. And I'll stop short about, I don't know, about a hand's breadth. About 5.5 inches from the bottom is where I'm going to stop, because we'll close the lower leg with buttons on the outseam as well. Okay? So I'm going to line this up. I've got a back leg and a front leg here. And I'm stopping at that notch. And then I'm going to shift all of my stitching down to the next notch. I'm going to check underneath for alignment. I'm going to back stitch really well. And then I'll continue down, pulling the pockets out of the way. And then stopping short about 5.5 inches from the leg opening, so that I have a place to put the buttons and loops to close the lower leg. Okay, now I can close the pocket bag itself. So for this, I'm going to do a double line of stitching so that it holds over a long period of time. So I'm going to do the first line of stitching 1/4 inch away from the cut edge, and then I'll do a second line of stitching 1/4 inch in from that. And that gives us a really solid pocket. I know it's not going to rip out at the bottom and leave things sitting inside my pant leg. Okay, that's line number 1. Now for line number 2. Okay. That outseam is complete. I can now sew the inseam. Then repeat with the opposite side. So once again, I hold them together. I'm going to align the pocket bags and the outseam. Backstitch carefully, lift this up, check for alignment again, reach my notch, backstitch well, and then I shift my whole leg down to second notch, check for alignment, backstitch well, and then stitch the entire outseam from there down. Oh, ran out of bobbin thread. Now I can sew the rest of the way down, again stopping short about 5.5 inches from the leg opening. Clipping a lot of the straight threads here. Close the pocket bag. So this is round one. And then I'll do round two. And now I'll sew the inseam. So from here, now I'm going to go and press seams open, and I will take the computer with me. Come with me, please. So I'll start by pressing the outseam. Below the opening, I'm just turning back the allowance and pressing. And I'll do that on both sides because it makes it easier to press the rest of the allowance. Okay, so the opening has been turned back and pressed. And now I'm starting to work my way up the inseam, Trying careful not to get burned. Okay. Up the inseam, and when I hit the bottom of the pocket bag, I'm not pressing it open beyond that. I have to clip my threads here from where I put the pocket bag opening. But then the pocket bag itself floats toward the front. So that means all seam allowances have to be pressed towards the front, from the bottom of the pocket bag up. So and then to handle this little transition right here, I'm just going to fold it back on itself and make a little extra turn with the allowance, and that will help just keep me from, I don't want to clip it, because if I clip it then it creates a weak spot. So at least this way all I'm doing is pressing it open below and pressing it one direction above, and I just have a little twisty spot in the seam allowance where it transitions at the bottom of the bag. So what that looks like is you have this nice clean out seam now, and then you also have this beautiful pocket bag on the inside that's right here. The hole is just big enough for the hand. And then before I finish turning, I will go ahead and press the inseam. Alright, so there's our little leg. It looks very cute. Have a funny little bump in the seam. I'm going to head back inside and just give it an extra press, because I don't like what it's doing. Smashing it open really well. There we go. It's a much smoother transition now. Lovely. Alright, one down, one to go. Again, I'll start by pressing open this little out seam leg opening. Right there. And let me do the other side next. Carefully pressing this open. Okay. Then this needs to press toward the front. On the other side, I did end up having to clip a little bit just to keep it smooth, because the funny bump that I was looking at was completely solved by a little bit of clipping. So instead of worrying about the inside being particularly secure, I know that at least on this piece, I'll have to just do a special bar tack at the bottom of the pocket bag to hold it in place. And that's a hand-sewn thing that I can do after the garment's completely made. Okay. So here we are. And the inseam. Now all I need to do to finish the main body is to stitch the crotch, and I'm going to start, see my little notch right here, I'm going to start there and I'm going to go all the way around and out the back. So I matched up the notches. I'm putting one pin in to give me security right there. I'm putting another pin where the crotch seams cross each other. I'm making sure that they're very well aligned so that it's a strong and beautiful crossing. Now this crotch seam, just like the one on the lining, this needs to be stitched twice for extra security. So I'll start right here at my notch, give it a good solid back stitch. This is another place where I'll put a bar tack after the garment's completely assembled. I'll put a reinforcement bar tack in that area, at the bottom of the fly. That's pass number one. And this will be pass number 2. Okay, so now that's done. So the crotch does not need to be pressed open all the way around. I know a lot of people do, but when the seam is between the legs, it's actually better if it stays flat and standing up. It's much more comfortable to wear. So you can press it flat at the top, and then we'll press the allowances open here at the front opening where we're going to put the fly. But we don't need to press open below that. So this much stays unpressed. And then press back center front. All right, our body is assembled. So we have this nice big waist that we're going to be gathering down onto a relatively small waistband, so there'll be plenty of fullness. So, speaking of the waistband, let's get to it. Starts off relatively easy. Just need to sew the short end. And then press well. Okay. Now we have a nice solid piece waistband. So the next bit is all hand sewn and it's done in quarter sections. First, using a hand needle and thread and a doubled strand of silk thread, we gather a quarter panel. And when we start at the front, we have this big deep pleat that we have to pin in place first. And then the gathering starts on top of that. So I'm going to take us over to the table again, and we'll begin working on that. So this pleat that I'm talking about, it's an inverted pleat, which means that it's open toward the front. The edge of the pleat is open toward the front on the inside. And it's very big. If you look at this pleat is almost 1.5 inches deep, leaving only about 1/4 of an inch to almost nothing. I think in this case we'll want to leave about 1/8 of an inch extending out past. So I'm just going to pin that for a second to hold it in place. I'm going to grab my waistband. Remember, the waistband has an allowance on it as well. I'm not turning it back yet. So I'm leaving about 3/8 of an inch hanging off the edge there. And I know that this pleat gets laid in like so, which means my gathering has to start here, which is about 3 inches from center front. And it stays relatively flat toward the front and then gains in depth as you reach the side seam and going around to the back. So let me thread up my needle. And I need a lot of thread. So I'm getting a big long one and then I'm going to double it. Okay, I'm going to knot the end very well. Nice big strong knot because I don't want it coming out while I'm working. I'm going to need a thimble for this for sure. Okay, so I'm right here. I'm going to be about 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and I'm just going to start doing a running stitch. I'm not trying to be at all like super precise or cartridge pleat accuracy with it, okay? I'm just doing a running stitch because all I'm going to do is gather it up. That's what I'm trying to do, is gather. Okay? Oh, my thread got out of sync. It's actually never happened to me before. How embarrassing. There we go. Now we're back in line. Okay. So I'm going to continue with this gathering stitch. And the stitches that I'm taking are not particularly long or short. They're just about average. They just kind of feel like what the fabric wants me to do. Okay, and then I will stitch each quarter panel onto the waistband as I gather it. So I'm really only gathering one at a time. Each section will be sewn on independently of the one next to it, so that if any thread ever breaks, the whole waistline isn't going to come apart and the whole thing fall down in a disastrous way. Okay, so there's no rocket science to this at this point. It's just clean, easy running stitch. Something to remember though is we're on the front. The pockets face toward the front, but you don't want to catch the pockets in the gathered stitching. The pockets will be laid on top of the gathers on the inside after it's done so that they're not compromised and they won't like hang open. Besides, you don't need the additional thickness in the waist area, especially when it's not consistent across the whole waistline. Almost done. I'm crossing my my little trim piece now, and I am ending right at the side seam. So you can see the needle is coming out right where the end of the stitching is. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my waistband again. Now I'm applying to the curved pointy edge at the bottom. I've already left room here for my pleat to occur. So I'm going to put a pin right there so that it's secure. Okay. And then I have a notch right here that tells me where I have a notch on the waistband that tells me where I need to match the side seam to. So I'm going to match it up there and I'm going to put a pin in it. And then I'm going to pull up the gathered stitching. Now notice it still has the needle attached to it. Okay? So I'm just going to pull up the gathers as tight as they need to be to sit comfortably. This doesn't have a whole lot of fullness, and I'm okay with that for now. Not thrilled about it, but I might send this to my client and have him try them on and then decide whether we want to make another pair that's more full or whether we want to keep them a little bit softer, a little bit less ostentatious. So I've got this pulled kind of tight, and now I'm just going to use the exact same thread that I pulled the gathers up with, and I'm going to back stitch my way to the front. And as I do so, I'm going to go around the gathered pleats. And I can take one pleat with each stitch, and it goes all the way through to the waistband, and it holds it and controls it. And by doing it this way from the back side, I can capture one pleat per stitch and make them very, very evenly spaced and very well attached to the waistband as well, because I can feel on the back side how much of a pick I'm taking as I work. So this back stitch is, for those of you who are embroiderers, this back stitch is a lot more like a stem stitch. You're on the wrong side of the fabric, and you're working left to right, but with a back stitch needle motion. So it creates essentially a stem stitch structure, but with each stitch you're catching the waistband, you're controlling a pleat, and the whole thing ends up being very balanced and I think much easier and less cumbersome to sew than if you were trying to do actual cartridge pleats. And a lot of cartridge pleat techniques have you stitch them on from the outside, which never seems to look right to me, at least where men's breeches are concerned. So right here, you can see what they look like. Each little gather is captured by one little stitch. And I keep moving the next pleat over so that I can capture it, pulling nice and tight. one at a time, really enjoying the feeling of each pleat under my fingers as I make sure that it gets gathered exactly the same way. And it becomes very routine. So once this quarter panel is done, then I thread up a whole new set of needle and thread, and then I can gather across the next quarter panel, which will be one of the back panels, and do exactly the same thing, slowly working my way around to the opposite front. And this really, it just helps to get your mind around the security of it. You know that when you're doing it in 4 sections like this, that you've got a garment that has a lot of longevity. Your double-stranded silk that you're doing this back stitching with is exceptionally strong. And the way that you're putting the stitches onto the waistband itself is actually a little bit lower stress than some other methods. I mean, lower stress to the fabric. I've seen the inside of the waistband of a couple of 1630s trousers, and they've actually, whenever they take a stitch with each pleat, when they capture a pleat with the back side, they actually go around it twice, which I thought was really interesting. They added even more security by going around each little gather pleat twice. You can see a little more progress here. I'm going to speed up my hand sewing a little bit so that we can get through this step and on to the next quarter panel. Once this quarter panel is done, I'll show you the outside so you can see how these gathers work up. Oh, I got a knot. There we go. Getting there. Almost done with this seam. I'm actually super excited that I didn't run out of thread yet. I usually run out of thread and have to thread up a new needle about halfway through. But I'm just going to make it. Alright, I'm going to take 2 stitches in the same place, very tight, and then cut. Look at that. I barely have 2 inches of thread left to work with. Pretty happy about that. Okay, so now you can see all of those gathers are very tightly controlled. I'm going to remove the pins. Now, when you look at the outside, you can see how beautiful each of these pleats folds. At least I hope you can see how beautiful they fall. And then for our big pleat at the front. Do you see how much is left here? Now we just lay that on top of the gathers and fold it back. This is the end result. You have this front where the gathers hang right up to the center line and it covers where a fly would go. You can barely see anything when these are on, especially when we put the hip pad in place. They're going to be so big and boofy that you'll be lucky if you can even see the buttons at center front. But these gathers look very nice and meaty and full. And they're all very even, and that's what this does. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to thread up the needle and I'm going to do the next quarter panel. And just to let everyone know, I'm going to wrap this up in about 30 minutes and be done for the day. I'll post an announcement for the next one. I believe that I'm going to continue working on this pair of pants, so the next project will probably be different, but there's already a process album for a pair of Venetians that's in the Modern Maker page on Facebook, so all the information is there for what I would be doing. See this front pocket right here? So that just lays right on top over the pleats, and then you can tack it in place, which I'm not going to do yet. I usually finish all the gathers and then I'll go back and tack the pockets in place. So the back, we don't have to worry about the big pleat or anything, so I'm just going to begin right here at the stitching line for the side seam, and I'm going to start my gathers. And then I'll just keep that going all the way to center back. And once I reach center back, then I'll do the same thing that I just did, which is to start working my way back the other direction with a back stitch, controlling every single pleat as I do. I'll try to get through these gathers as quickly as possible. Okay, same as I did for the front. I'm stopping right at the stitching of the center back seam. I'm going to reach over here and grab for my waistband. And I match up the center back seams. And I'm going to throw a pin in here so that they stay put. And now I have all this fullness. You can see now, because of the pleat, there's less fullness in front. You've got all this extra fullness in back, so it's all well balanced, because you don't want the front to stick out as far as you want the back. So I'll start pulling this down to the right size. Generally, I pull it just a hair tighter than it looks like it needs, because it always comes to pass that you have to cram extra pleats in at the end because there's a little bit of take up in the stitching as you're working. So I already have that pin there. I'm just immediately going to start back stitching. I'm going to do one stitch without capturing a pleat so that I've secured my thread. Okay, and then I'm going to start pulling some pleats toward where I want to work. I'll push one into position and take my stitch. Pull the next one into position and take my stitch. And so it goes across the entirety of the back waistband. This same gathering technique can be used for skirts as well. When you look at the amount of fullness that's in the tops, in the waistlines of the skirts for pretty much all of the tailor's manuals, there's actually not that much. So this type of stitching, small gathers and this type of back stitching, can actually be really beneficial for that exact type, because we're not dealing with a whole lot of fullness compared to what a lot of people put into their skirts and trousers. We're not dealing with a ton of fullness, just a little bit. And by stitching it this way, you have really good control. Your gathers are very small and diminutive, which is exactly what you want if you're stitching it to a bodice or you're trying to achieve, that classic correct look. There's not a lot of fullness in the waist. It's just not the way they built these types of clothes. At least where women's skirts are concerned. I also, incidentally, I find this technique of hand stitching the gathers on the waist to be quite a bit easier than the typical machine method, which is to run two lines of stitching and then gather them up, or even the one that I've seen where you take a piece of cord and you zigzag stitch over it on your domestic sewing machine and then use the cord to draw up the fabric. This method it looks more period. It's less fiddly to work with as far as I'm concerned. I feel like most of the other gathering methods tend to be a little bit, I don't know, a little bit labor intensive because you have to handle everything so much. Whereas this, you just gather, stitch, and go. Okay, I'm running out of thread, so I'm going to take a couple of stitches in one spot right now, and I'm going to secure it off, and I'm going to cut a fresh piece of thread. Almost there. Okay, and done. So now we've placed slightly more gathers at the back and fewer gathers toward the side so that this nice stripe actually stays visible. Because if we put too many gathers here, this stripe would then disappear at the top. And we don't want that to happen. We want this to be nice and visible, so we're keeping it flat or at the side. Just knowing that its width and shape will enable it to boof out a little bit more once we put the hip pad in place. So you can see how that really works, I hope. All right, folks. It's getting close to 7 p.m. and the next two steps are just more of the same. So I'm going to call it a night. Thank you so much for watching. Uh, Please take a minute if you can and talk about the live stream to other people and stay posted on the Modern Maker so that you can know when the next live stream is going to be. It'll be sometime next week, most likely Wednesday, possibly on Monday, definitely not on Tuesday. Thank you so much for watching, and you all have a wonderful evening.